for educational and entertainment purposes only. Let me tell you about Johnnie Cochran, a man whose story began in Shreveport, Louisiana, 1937. His parents, Johnnie Sr. and Hattie, worked hard, selling insurance and Avon, building a dream for their family. The South was tough for a black family with ambition, so they joined the Great Migration, heading west to Los Angeles. They settled in West Adams, not rich, but determined. That small house was filled with love, ambition, and lessons about hard work. Johnnie watched his parents grind every day, learning that your start doesn't define your finish. Their sacrifices planted a seed of greatness in him. They showed him that you could come from humble beginnings and still dream big. That foundation was everything. It was the launchpad for the legend he'd become. And so, Johnnie's journey began, with hope, grit, and a vision for something greater. In school, Johnnie Cochran was all business. He became valedictorian at Los Angeles High, outworking everyone. At UCLA, he joined Kappa Alpha Psi, finding brotherhood and purpose. Inspired by Thurgood Marshall, Johnnie saw law as a tool for justice. He realized being a lawyer meant giving a voice to the voiceless. That inspiration lit a fire in him. He enrolled at Loyola Law School, determined to fight for his community. This wasn't just a career, it was a calling. He chased justice, not money. Johnnie saw the law as a living force for change. He was ready to step into the arena for those who'd been counted out. His journey to the courtroom was a journey for justice. After law school, Johnnie started as a city attorney, learning the system from within. He soon realized the system didn't work for everyone. In private practice, his first big case was a loss, but it taught him the power of fighting for his community. He became the go-to lawyer for families facing police abuse, a symbol of hope. Johnnie even returned to the DA's office, aiming to reform it from the inside. But his heart was always with the people, so he opened the Cochran Firm. He won landmark cases, securing justice for families and building a reputation for fearless advocacy. His gift? Making complex cases simple, connecting with juries, and giving a voice to the unheard. He was more than a lawyer. He was a master communicator. Johnnie Cochran fought for justice, inside and out. He proved that real change comes from both challenging and transforming the system. His fight was always for the people. All that hard work paid off. Johnnie Cochran became wealthy and respected. But his true legacy wasn't money or fame. He changed the conversation about justice, race, and policing in America. He gave a voice to the silenced and inspired a generation. Johnnie showed you could fight for justice and succeed. He was a role model, especially for young black men and women. His journey, from Shreveport to the top, proved you could win without losing your purpose. He inspired lawyers, activists, and leaders to make a difference. Johnnie Cochran's mark on this country will never be erased. He used his gifts to serve others. That's the greatest success. Remember the whole journey, not just the famous trial. Johnnie Cochran was more than a lawyer. He was a force of nature, a storm in the courtrooms of Los Angeles. He took on impossible cases, defended the condemned, and won. Cochran didn't just argue the law, he reshaped the narrative, exposing cracks in the system and challenging the powerful. His legacy: a hero to some, a villain to others, a man who dared to disrupt the status quo. Johnnie Cochran wasn't just a lawyer, he was a wrecking ball. He shattered corporate power, exposed government conspiracies, and won battles that shook the system. For the powerful, he was an existential threat. For the people, a champion who proved justice could fight back. Johnnie Cochran mastered the legal system's shadows, turning loopholes into weapons, freeing activists, and funding the fight for justice. His brilliance disrupted both government schemes and criminal rackets, making him a dual threat. Now, as the system closed in, the stage was set for a final confrontation. Johnnie Cochran's journey began not in celebrity courtrooms, but on the hard streets of Los Angeles, fighting for civil rights. As one of the few black deputy city attorneys, he saw injustice firsthand. This experience forged him, turning his idealism into a weapon. He opened his own firm, taking on police brutality cases, and became a legend, standing up for those the system ignored. As Johnnie Cochran's reputation grew, he realized justice wasn't just about criminal courtrooms. He took on corporate giants, winning massive civil suits that forced real change. The money fueled his fight for civil rights, making him a modern-day Robin Hood, using the system's wealth to battle the very establishment it served. Johnnie Cochran's firm once won a staggering $700 million verdict, a single case, not a class action. This wasn't just a legal win, it was a seismic shock to corporate America. Suddenly, companies realized Cochran could bankrupt them with one case. Insurance models crumbled. Fear replaced calculation. The verdict made Cochran a true threat to the establishment, a force they couldn't ignore or control. After that, the question wasn't if he'd win again, but how far the powerful would go to stop him. Cochran's genius was redefining reasonable doubt. He didn't just defend clients, he put the system itself on trial. Every flaw in police work, every hint of bias, he exposed and magnified. He taught juries to question everything, making the state's burden nearly insurmountable. To prosecutors, he was a trickster. To his clients, a guardian of justice. By challenging the system's legitimacy, Cochran became the most dangerous man in the courtroom. The O.J. Simpson trial made Cochran a household name. He shifted the focus from Simpson to the LAPD's racism and corruption, especially through Detective Mark Fuhrman. When Fuhrman's racist tapes surfaced, trust in the prosecution collapsed. Then came the glove. "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." Cochran's closing argument turned the trial into a referendum on police injustice. He gave the jury a reason to doubt, and that was all he needed. The verdict wasn't just about O.J., it was about the system itself. Cochran had changed the game forever. Before O.J., Cochran shielded Michael Jackson from a career-ending scandal. He reframed the allegations as a shakedown, casting Jackson as a victim of extortion. The strategy: settle the civil suit, starve the criminal case of evidence. The accuser's family stopped cooperating, the prosecution's case collapsed. Cochran didn't prove innocence, he made prosecution impossible. Sometimes the best defense is making sure the trial never happens. In 1999, Sean "Puffy" Combs faced serious charges after a nightclub shooting. Cochran dismantled the prosecution's witnesses, exposing inconsistencies and motives. He took the risk of putting Combs on the stand, transforming him from celebrity to relatable defendant. The defense shifted blame, challenged the evidence, and painted Combs as a target, not a criminal. The jury acquitted him on all charges. Once again, Cochran turned a high-profile trial into a lesson in doubt and persuasion. With Cochran, even the untouchable walked free. In 1993, Snoop Dogg was charged with murder after his bodyguard shot a rival gang member. The prosecution called it a gangland execution, but Johnnie Cochran argued self-defense, claiming the victim was the aggressor. Cochran exposed lost evidence by the LAPD, casting doubt on the case. The jury acquitted Snoop and his bodyguard, turning a likely conviction into a stunning victory. Todd Bridges, once a beloved TV star, spiraled into crack addiction and was charged with attempted murder, but with Johnnie Cochran as his lawyer, the defense argued Bridges was too intoxicated to form intent. Crucially, blood evidence pointed to someone else. The jury found reasonable doubt, and Bridges was acquitted. For Johnnie Cochran, the Geronimo Pratt case was a crusade, his greatest achievement, more meaningful than any celebrity acquittal. Pratt, a Black Panther leader, was framed for murder by the FBI and LAPD and spent 27 years in prison. Cochran exposed the conspiracy, proved Pratt's innocence, and overturned the conviction, his ultimate victory against the system. To understand the forces arrayed against Johnnie Cochran, you have to understand a dark chapter in American history known as COINTELPRO. This was not some fringe conspiracy theory. It was a real, secret, and illegal series of programs conducted by the FBI from the 1950s to the 1970s. Its official purpose was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize domestic political organizations. In reality, it was a government-sanctioned war on dissent. Its targets were civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and black empowerment groups like the Black Panther Party. The FBI saw these groups not as citizens exercising their rights, but as subversive threats to national security that needed to be eliminated by any means necessary. COINTELPRO's methods were insidious and devastating. They went far beyond simple surveillance. Agents forged letters to create conflict between activist leaders. They planted false stories in the media to ruin reputations. They used psychological warfare to drive targets to paranoia and despair. Most sinister of all, they used informants and agent provocateurs to infiltrate groups, incite violence, and frame members for crimes they did not commit. This was the playbook. Create a crime, pin it on a target, and let the justice system do the rest. The goal was to imprison, silence, or destroy anyone who challenged the established order, and for decades, it worked with terrifying efficiency. Although the program was officially terminated in the 1970s after being exposed by congressional investigations, its ghost never left. Some believe it just went underground, changing its name and shifting into separate operations or groups. The tactics, the mindset, and the networks it created lingered within law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The idea that certain individuals were enemies of the state who could be dealt with outside the normal rules of justice persisted. The system learned how to be more subtle, how to cover its tracks better, but the underlying mission remained. When Johnnie Cochran began successfully defending high-profile clients who were the modern-day equivalents of COINTELPRO's original targets, outspoken black artists, activists, and celebrities, he was not just winning cases. He was directly interfering with the modern iteration of this shadow war. Cochran's clients were precisely the kind of influential figures that the old COINTELPRO would have targeted. Rappers like Tupac Shakur and Snoop Dogg had massive cultural influence. Activists like Geronimo Pratt were direct descendants of the Black Power movement. Celebrities like O.J. Simpson and Michael Jackson had the power to sway global public opinion. By getting these men acquitted, Cochran was thwarting the system's ability to neutralize them. He was not just a lawyer, he was a counterintelligence operative, dismantling the government's own covert strategies in open court. He was exposing their methods and freeing their targets, making him a primary obstacle to their unofficial mission. Johnnie Cochran's victories were not just legal defeats for the prosecution, they were strategic failures for a much larger apparatus of control. Government agencies, particularly those with roots in intelligence and surveillance, rely on the legal system as a tool. A criminal conviction is the final public step in a long process of targeting and neutralization. When they invested resources, surveillance, informants, building a case, they expected a return on that investment in the form of a prison sentence. Johnnie Cochran consistently ruined that return. He was like a saboteur on the assembly line of justice, breaking the machine just before it produced its final product. This made him more than an annoyance. It made him a direct threat to their operational integrity. Every time he won, he sent a message to other potential targets: the system can be beaten. He provided a blueprint for resistance. His strategies, attacking the chain of custody, exposing informant deals, putting police conduct on trial, were a masterclass in how to fight back. This was incredibly dangerous for a system that relies on the perception of its own invincibility. It needs people to believe that fighting back is hopeless, that the evidence is always overwhelming, and that the police are always credible. Cochran shattered that illusion with every acquittal, empowering others to question authority. The system began to view Cochran himself as the problem. It was not just about the individual clients anymore. He was the common denominator in a series of high-profile failures. In their eyes, he was a systemic vulnerability. The same way a hacker might find an exploit in a piece of software, Cochran had found the exploits in the justice system. He understood its protocols, its biases, and its procedural weaknesses better than anyone. Instead of patching these vulnerabilities, it was easier to target the man who knew how to use them. The focus shifted from beating him on a case-by-case basis to finding a way to remove him from the board entirely. This led to an unseen war being fought in and around his cases. While Cochran was battling prosecutors in the courtroom, he was also battling unseen forces outside of it. He and his clients were undoubtedly under intense surveillance. Their lives were scrutinized, looking for any weakness, any piece of leverage that could be used against them. The pressure was immense. Cochran knew he was being watched. He knew that any misstep he made, personal or professional, would be pounced upon. He was not just practicing law, he was navigating a minefield, aware that the very system he was challenging was actively trying to engineer his downfall. As Johnnie Cochran's power grew, so did the establishment's desperation. His success was a direct affront to their authority. He did not just beat them, he humiliated them. The O.J. Simpson trial, broadcast to the world, was a global embarrassment for the LAPD and the American justice system. The Geronimo Pratt case was even worse. It was not just an exposure of incompetence, but of a malicious, decades-long conspiracy by the FBI and local police. Cochran had pulled back the curtain and shown the world the ugly machinery of the state. This was an unforgivable sin. He had broken the cardinal rule. You do not expose the secrets of the powerful. The government's view of him solidified. He was no longer a defense attorney, he was a threat to institutional stability. His relentless challenges to law enforcement credibility were eroding public trust, a cornerstone of social control. His work on cases like the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, where he sought reparations from the government, posed a direct financial and historical threat. He was a legal wrecking ball, and he was aiming it at the very foundations of government authority. In the cold calculus of power, a person who can inflict that much damage becomes a target. He was a man in a tailored suit, but in their eyes, he was an enemy combatant. This is where the system's fight against him would have escalated. When legal and public battles fail, the playbook of operations, like COINTELPRO, suggests moving to more personal and destructive tactics. This could involve anything from manufacturing a scandal to ruin his reputation, to creating a legal trap through a manufactured tax issue or a disingenuous client. The goal is to discredit, disbar, or otherwise neutralize the threat. Given Cochran's wealth, his connections to activist groups, and his high-profile, controversial clients, there were countless angles from which to launch an attack. He was a man with many secrets to protect, not of his own wrongdoing, but of the movements and people he supported. The pressure campaign would have been relentless and multifaceted. It would come from all sides. Federal agencies, local police departments, and even private entities with government connections all had a vested interest in seeing him fall. They operate on leverage. And a man like Cochran, who was making it impossible for them to gain leverage over their primary targets, became the new primary target himself. The system he challenged so brilliantly was now turning its full, undivided attention to him. Johnnie Cochran had outplayed the system in the courtroom, but now he faced a new, far more dangerous game, one played in the shadows with no rules at all. While Johnnie Cochran fought for hip-hop's biggest stars in court, another battle raged in the shadows of Los Angeles. The JDL, a militant group, allegedly targeted the booming rap scene for extortion. For them, it wasn't about politics, it was about cold, hard cash. As Cochran shielded artists from danger, he crossed paths with this other underworld. The FBI uncovered a protection racket in the rap scene, threats made against artists, then offers of protection for a hefty fee. Even icons like Tupac and Eazy-E were targets, but Johnnie Cochran gave artists real protection, through the law, not fear. Johnnie Cochran was a problem for the music mob. His legal victories gave artists hope, making them poor targets for extortion. He fought on two fronts against the government and criminal groups like the JDL, threatening their power and profits. In the Crossfire, Cochran became a force for order in a world built on fear. Before the fame, there was the case of Geronimo Pratt, a ghost that haunted Johnnie Cochran's career. In 1972, Cochran defended Pratt, a Black Panther and Vietnam vet, accused of murder. Despite a strong alibi, Pratt was convicted. The loss drove Cochran for decades, shaping his fight against injustice. Geronimo Pratt's 1972 conviction rested on Julius Butler's testimony, a lie that destroyed an innocent man. Decades later, Cochran uncovered proof. Butler was a paid informant for the LAPD and FBI. The prosecution hid this, framing Pratt. The truth changed everything. Unmasking Julius Butler as an informant was just the beginning. The FBI's COINTELPRO targeted Geronimo Pratt, a Black Panther leader, framing him for murder despite knowing he was innocent. The government hid evidence, using the justice system as a weapon of political warfare. By exposing COINTELPRO, Cochran revealed the dark underbelly of the American security state. After 27 years, Geronimo Pratt was freed, his conviction overturned, exposing a catastrophic violation of justice. For Johnnie Cochran, it was more than a victory. It was proof the system could be broken, and that corruption ran deep. This case became his greatest triumph, but it came at a price. He had exposed the system's darkest secret. Johnnie Cochran was more than a lawyer, he was a decoder. He saw the legal system as a game, corporate power as a fortress to breach, and government secrecy as a house of cards. His victories, O.J. Simpson, Geronimo Pratt, were masterclasses in exposing systemic failure. He was the man who knew too much, and the powerful feared him because he could not be beaten, bought, or silenced. Section 2. A War on Three Fronts. Johnnie Cochran's life became a battlefield where three distinct wars were being waged simultaneously. Each front presented a different kind of enemy, each with its own methods and motivations for wanting him gone. The convergence of these threats created an atmosphere of unprecedented pressure and danger, a perfect storm from which there was little chance of escape. He was a man besieged, fighting a multi-front war against the most powerful and ruthless forces in society. Armed only with his intellect and the rule of law. It was a battle he was winning in the courtroom, but one that was becoming increasingly perilous outside of it. The first front was the official one. The government. From the LAPD to the FBI, Cochran had spent a career humiliating and exposing them. With the Pratt case, he had proven their capacity for deep, criminal conspiracy. With cases like Simpson and Snoop Dogg, he had dismantled their investigative work and cost them high-profile convictions. In the eyes of these agencies, he was not a defense attorney, but an enemy operative, disrupting their objectives and eroding public trust. They fought him with surveillance, with legal pressure, and with the full weight of the state, viewing him as a systemic threat that needed to be neutralized for the sake of institutional order. The second front was corporate and financial. His firm's massive civil settlements, particularly the $700 million earthquake, had made him a pariah in boardrooms and insurance companies. He represented a fundamental threat to the predictability and profitability of big business. He had introduced a catastrophic level of risk into their calculations. A man who could inflict that kind of financial damage with a single lawsuit is not an opponent, he is a market disaster. This quiet, powerful world of money and influence would have seen him as a rogue element that needed to be contained, a force of economic chaos that threatened their bottom line. The third front was the most unpredictable and violent. The criminal underworld. By representing the biggest names in hip-hop, Cochran had inadvertently stepped into the territory of groups like the Jewish Defense League, who allegedly saw these artists as a source of revenue through extortion. Cochran was a disruptor to their business model. He provided his clients with legitimate power, making them less susceptible to intimidation and fear. To a criminal enterprise, a man who takes away your targets is a rival. This was a war fought not with legal briefs but with threats and street-level intimidation, adding a raw physical danger to the more strategic threats he faced from the government and corporations. The echo of a verdict. Johnnie Cochran fought the government, corporations, and the underworld, and won, but every victory painted a bigger target on his back. His legacy is hope for the powerless, but a warning to the powerful. Now you are the jury. Was his silence the system's final chilling verdict? The doubt is more than reasonable. That's the legacy of Johnnie Cochran.